All right, it is 8:30, and we are going to start our Pecha Kucha. So thank you all for joining us for the pre-conference members showcase Pecha Kucha. This year, Fluid Practices 2021 members exhibition features 29 members whose works can be viewed on the NAHP website, NorthAmericanHandPapermakers.org. The works will also be presented as a slideshow during the lunch hour of the conference. And tonight, we are joined by 5 of the exhibitors. Meg Black, and presenting with Hanna May Padilla, Lea Basile Lazarus, Amanda Dagner, Jill Olgaard, and Sage Serrano. We're going to start with Meg and Hanna. So Meg has been a practicing artist working with natural fibers for over 30 years. Her focus on nature's palette yields stunning landscapes, seascapes, abstracts, and garden views. Meg received a PhD from Lesley University, an MFA from the Massachusetts College of Art, and a BFA from SUNY Oswego. Hanna May Padilla is the co-founder of Fibex, a Philippine corporation trading in abaca fibers. I'm going to turn it over to you, Meg and Hanna.
All right, thank you very much, Jerusa. So my name is Meg Black, and as Jerusa said, I am a professor of, I'm a professor of art and architectural history, and I've been a papermaker for over 30 years. And as a professor of architecture in particular, I've been very interested in sustainability and sustainable materials. And so I got to wondering, well, what about my materials? Are the materials I'm using, which is abaca to create my artwork, how sustainable is that? I always knew it was organic and it was used for tea bags, but I started poking around largely, doing some research and then sharing what I was learning on LinkedIn. And I was hashtagging abaca. And one day I get this response from this young woman from the Philippines saying, hey, I'm Hanna, and my family owns an abaca farm, and we are harvesting abaca and sending it around the world for all sorts of things, such as PPE, and Mercedes-Benz is using this, and we're in ropes and clothes. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I had no idea. So the two of us started communicating through LinkedIn, and I asked Hanna to join me tonight and share her family's company called Fibex Corporation and the incredible work they're doing with this ancient fiber all over the world to help offset the impacts of climate change. So our presentation is called Modern Circumstances, Handmade Paper on the Front Lines to Combat Climate Change. And again, these are all pictures of my studio or my artwork, and everything you're looking at is abaca. So as I say, I was very concerned about my materials, and that's what led to my research. And I found out that the scientific community is using abaca to assist intercropping former monoculture plantations and rainforest areas, particularly with coconut palms. Planting abaca can also minimize erosion and sedimentation problems in coastal areas, which are important breeding places for sea fish. The water holding capacity of the soil will be improved and floods and landslides will be prevented. Abaca waste can also be used for fertilizer. And I only have a few minutes to go through this, so I'll talk more about it on Saturday. But each one of these pieces is work I did. This is for a chemistry. This is for Yale University science. This is for medical. This is the PPE, and then corporate has to do with, you know, Mercedes and cars and all sorts of, you know, corporations. And then we have just what we're typically used to seeing Abaca for. And then this is some information that Hanna shared with me, that the Philippines exporting of Abaca has helped the country $94 million in economic growth because of exporting this fiber. And again, this fiber is eco-friendly, great for sustainability and green engineering. And so I, you know, basically just from meeting Hanna, how much I've learned about the positive impact of Abaca around the world, and how farmers and corporations and hospitals are using it instead of plastic synthetic fibers and finding it much more durable and sustainable. So that's in a nutshell our presentation.
Meg, thanks for inviting me. Yeah, I really want to tell you how it's good that we support natural and eco-friendly materials, and it's really good to see that you're integrating it with your art. And on Saturday, we'll tell you more about how Abaca can be used in our daily lives. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you all. I can't wait to hear the longer presentation on Saturday.
Thank you so much.
Our next presenter is Lea Basile Lazarus. Leah has just retired from teaching art for over 25 years. Leah is a professional artist creating contemporary prints and paper pulp paintings. She has recently moved to Gig Harbor, Washington, where she has a home printmaking studio. Leah creates her pulp paintings at Hook Pottery Paper in Indiana.
Okay, so hi everyone, thanks for having me. Like Jerusha said, I am a printmaker and paper maker. I have been a printmaker for a long time and only a paper maker for the last 6 years. Andrea Peterson got me hooked. So when I started paper making, I kept it pretty separate from my printmaking. And what this talk is about is how I made these connections between my prints and my paper. And now they're very fluid. I go back and forth and use the same materials and techniques in both printmaking and in paper making. And when I started making my paper making, here's an example of using foam insulation, either as a stencil or for creating these figures that I actually put with my paper lithos to create a woman's march. So again, they were separate. Here's an example of these foam stencils being used for my paper pulp paintings. Then I started using hot glue as a drawing material to create stencils. And also, instead of the thick insulation, I started using Pellon, which was, you all know what Pellon is, and it's much thinner. And here are some results. The drawing with hot glue gun began this amazing change in my work. It allowed me to be more spontaneous, appearing in my paper pieces. On the left here, you'll see the Pellon, which has ink on it, because what I realized is that, oh, I made these for to block out on my paper pulp paintings, but wow, I can roll ink on them and use them in my prints, which was great. And on the right is one of my hot glue gun drawings that, again, I use on my paper pulp paintings to block out, and then I roll ink on them. Very organic, very different than the Pellon. Here are a couple of other hot glue gun stencils, and you see the one on the left. It's all broken up, right? And you'd think I'd throw it away, but no, it makes amazing textures on my paper pulp paintings and my prints. And the piece on the right, the stencil on the right is actually as large as a 22 by 30 sheet of paper. So I've started making much bigger stencils and using them in many different ways in my pieces. This is a triptych that started out being just a paper pulp painting, but as you can see, I took my hot glue stencils and inked them up and printed them on these 3 pieces of paper, and then used pastel to hand color them in. There's a couple of examples that I'm going to show you. The left image is a print, and the right image is a paper pulp painting. And you can see here how much my paper pulp practice has influenced my printing practice. Again, a print on the left and a paper pulp painting on the right. It's just amazing how I can use these materials in both printmaking and my paper pulp painting. I started using metallics. These are 2 prints, but I started using gold leaf, and I love using metallic pigments for my paper pulp paintings. And I'm not even a blingy person, but I do like that touch in my pieces. Here are 3 more examples of paper pulp paintings, using stencils, using hot glue, using turkey basters, using anything that I can get my hands on to create the textures that I want to create. And about 2 years, it took me about 2 years, and then I had an aha moment when I realized I could use those hot glue drawings for embossments and combining them with some printing. So the piece here on the left is a hot glue embossment with some Pellon stencils. And for these pieces, I do a lot of hand painting and I do a lot of hand drawing. 2 more prints. Inking up my stencil on the left and hand coloring, and again using those hot glue drawings, stencils for embossment, and using Pellon for my printing. And here I am, this is familiar to all of you, getting ready to begin working on your base color. Here are some of my stencils placed on my base color. Here are 2 paper pulp paintings that I created, not this past summer, but 2 summers ago, where I used these stencils, but they became much more textural and less identified as houses. And it was amazing. I had no idea this was going to happen. And what a great transition into making my work just a little more abstract. The left is a close-up of the image on the right, a paper pulp painting. This past summer, before I went to Hook Pottery Paper, I had a commission, and my client had seen some small little collages that I had made, and she wanted me to make them larger. But she just built a house in Bend, and she wanted me to use earth tones, colors that were part of the Oregon coast, so blues and greens and whatever. So after I made these pieces for my client, I realized, oh, I'm going to try this. I'm about to go to Hook Pottery Paper, and I am going to use this linear vertical movement in my paper pulp pieces. And the one on the right is the first one I did. And then I realized, well, I have so many more options in paper pulp. I'm going to kind of loosen up and not be so rigid. And so here are 2 of my final pieces. I made about 15 pieces this summer at Hook Pottery Paper. You still see that linear movement, but it's a lot more organic. Again, using my hot glue guns, turkey basters, syringes, stencils, anything to get me into this vertical or landscape-like image that I begun creating. Jerusha said that I recently moved to the Pacific Northwest, And that has definitely influenced my new body of work. My last slide that I'm going to show you is my finished pulp pieces on the right in my printmaking studio, and 4 images that are in progress. So I'm starting to take what I learned this summer when I was making my paper pulp paintings and see how I can transition that in my printmaking that I'll work on for the rest of the year. That's about it. Thanks, everybody. And next speaker.
Thank you so much, Leah.
Sure.
And I realized I was just so excited about the Pecha Kucha. I jumped in and didn't talk about questions. So we're going to have all the presenters do their talks, and we'll address the questions that you put in the Q&A and chat at the end. Let's see, our next speaker. Amanda Dagner educates through writing, publishing, traveling to teach, and exhibit work. Dagner worked at Hand Papermaking, which she co-founded and co-published from 1985 to 92. She taught at Minneapolis College of Art and Design from 94 to 2005. Dagner was the first artist in residence and first artistic director for the Minnesota Center for Book Arts, and she co-ran Cave Paper from its founding until 2000. She's now a full-time artist.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah, actually, I did run Cave Paper a little longer than that, for actually 25 years, but that's okay. So what I'm going to speak about here is the birth of the book Handmade Path. So throughout the pandemic, during global upheaval, including China bashing, we wanted to make something that reached beyond borders. So this is a collaboration between basically 3 people, but I also included Zhao Zhen, next slide, because his work, he's the head of the department at Tsinghua University. It's a large, there are 15 full-time faculty there. And without him, I wouldn't have met Lu Jingren, who is also on the faculty there. And through multiple trips next, we got to know each other pretty well. And Lu, he came to the United States for the first time, and he trusted me to plan his month-long visit. He does not speak English, and he was a keynote speaker at Codex, and then also came and gave a workshop. And this was made possible through Cave Paper Editions, a grant from the Metropolitan Regional Arts Council, funding from Winifred Lutz and the AIGA. Next. And at the Minnesota Center for Book Arts, he met Peng Lu. And Peng is a graphic designer teaching at St. Cloud University. And he also, with Jamu, created this piece of artwork, which I could spend 6 minutes talking about. So you'll just have to go on his website and see it. Next slide. So hundreds of talented artists could have contributed to Handmade Path. We invited some artists whose paths have intersected ours. Next slide. For this reason, most of the artists come from China and the United States, but they also come from Germany, Hong Kong, Japan, Korea, Canada, France. Next slide. The idea for the book, and Peng met Lu for the first time at this workshop at Minnesota Center for Book Arts, so he became a third collaborator, was to, next slide, to ask 100 artists the same 6 questions. So this is the invitation above that we sent out to the 100 artists. Is designed by Peng. The film below is part of the process for making a polymer plate. And at that time, my studio was next to Chip Schilling's. And Lu had never used a letterpress. In fact, there are hardly any small presses in China because Mao destroyed them. So this was a unique experience for him to make a polymer plate. And we decided to ask the artists to include their hands working, their handwriting, and images of their work. Next, please. Handwriting connects the hand, the mind, and the heart in an intimate way. And so these wonderful letters and images started coming in next. But the Chinese artists also sent their portraits, which was unexpected. And so then we decided to include portraits, which added more texture and more feeling to the project. Next. So of course I had to invite a lot of people to send pictures. So next slide, the first image that came, the first letter that came was from Richard Flavin, who since has passed on. And the book is dedicated to Richard. So next slide. We asked the artist how they got started becoming artists, their breakdowns and breakthroughs in their career. Next slide. Why do they still make handmade paper and books? Next slide. What are some of their future dream projects? Next slide. What are the 5 senses of the book? So when you're reading a book, what are you feeling on all parts of your body, not just your mind? Next slide. We asked the artists the difference between reading a digital book and an actual book. Next slide. So, reading is not only about transplanting ourselves to the beyond, but we modify ourselves as we're reading to see the world differently. Next slide. So our vision or purpose for Handmade Path is for you to participate in this collaboration. Next slide. So this is the first book from Cave Paper Editions. Next slide. It's a hybrid offset and handmade paper elements. Next slide. And it's an edition of 250 copies. So on the left is a detail of the custom-made cotton paper. So the English words were printed, letterpress, and the character for Tao was printed. And then after that was dry, that was ground up and added back into the vat to make this custom-made paper. So it contains the Japanese characters and the English words. And on the right is the book cover. And Lou Jingren invented or created the calligraphy for that. And it's an ancient Chinese symbol to communicate a hand growing out of a heart. And we invite you to bring your own heart towards the beyond, which is right here inside this book. Next. And like all collaborations, it takes a village. So there's, this is being produced in Minneapolis. Folger Printing is doing the offset work. Campbell Logan is doing the binding. A bunch of us are making the paper. So that's my presentation.
Thank you. All right, our next presenter is Jill Olgaard. Jill Olgaard is a professor and chair of the art department at Cedar Crest College, in Allentown, Pennsylvania. She earned her BFA from Minnesota State University Moorhead and MFA from the Minneapolis College of Art and Design. Exploration in the tactile and ambient nature of design through handmade paper underscores her work.
So I just want to start by just giving a little introduction. In general, my work involves structure and forms evolve and patterns are revealed as emphasis is placed on spaces between, marks around the edges that become an essential component of the whole. The formal structure of the grid serves as an underlay or scaffold in my work. The grid references craft traditions of weaving, strategic movements in board games, or linear alignment of city streets. The grid provides boundaries, spaces, and patterns for my work to evolve. My primary materials are abaca, pulp paint, and wire that I either dip in pulp or wrap with sheets of abaca. Visual relationships between colors, shapes, and positive negative spaces guide my decision-making and activate the work. The interpretation of the grid began as a two-dimensional concept that quickly moved into three-dimensional forms, from wall reliefs to standalone in the round work that provide alternate views for the consideration of the visual relationships as a whole. As the scale of the work increases, more attention focuses on opening up spaces and creating complex negative shapes to draw attention to areas around the structure, as well as the linear relationships of the interior arena. Deconstructing the grid provides a way to animate the structure through its gestures and activate the surrounding areas. Breaking out of the confines of the horizontal and vertical axis of the grid situates the work in a more dynamic stance. Beyond the formal elements of design, other references to the grid inform the development of my work. Looking at the grid as a mapping device encourages the investigation of ideas related to a sense of place. Outlining city streets, in this piece titled Navigation, draws attention to overall patterns, and then altering the structure in Redefined adds a new dimension to the configuration of lines. The organic nature of the handmade paper provides a compelling contrast to the rigid structure of the grid as it softens the edges. Layering the grid adds a new complexity by creating a lattice work to realize yet another approach to the notion of scaffolding as objects are suspended between layers. And veils create distortion to obscure the visual rhythms and patterns underneath. Additional attention to pattern emerges as both two-dimensional and three-dimensional elements combine. The three-dimensional modules frame a particular area, suggesting a need for a shift in placement to align the squares within the cubes. The three-dimensional forms take on a structural function as cast paper objects introduce a sense of interaction or play. Or the cube as a module aligns in an orderly arrangement, playing off the structural organization of the columns and rows, while adding an organic counterplay with the irregular and misaligned edges. Exploring relationships between the objects becomes an important aspect of my work. Considering further content, the cube becomes a container as it draws attention to activity within the interior spaces. Ideas of internal or enclosed, assorted or disarrayed, measured or refined begin to appear in the work. The grid may also serve as a tool. As traces of pulp gather on the surface of the woven screen, shapes emerge between the intersections. Defining boundaries to create parameters serves as a way to identify new systems that serve as an alternate tool. Using the newly defined system and tracing the open spaces reveals new perspectives and patterns that ultimately create new visual rhythms. taking the process a step further, reestablishing the traced marks as three-dimensional objects isolates and emphasizes the relationship between the spaces while providing marks around the edges to define an essential component to the whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. We are making good time, guys. All right, on to our next presenter. Sage Serrano is an artist living and working in San Diego, California. She received her MFA from San Diego State University and her BA in Visual Arts Studio with honors from UC San Diego. Her recent work has been investigating connections that are forced, found, or failed.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sage Serrano, and I recently received my MFA in Painting and Printmaking from San Diego State University, and I'm currently a lecturer teaching beginning drawing as well as bookmaking workshops around San Diego. Thinking about fluid practices for this year's theme, I wanted to kind of talk about some of my earlier body of work called Half Faces, which was an exploration of drawing graphite portraits of loved ones on cardboard. I was interested in the juxtaposition between these both biodegradable subjects and kind of was exploring that. And I started questioning this idea if drawing needed graphite in order to be considered a drawing. And this question started pursuing more and more in my head. And I started exploring different classes while in grad school. In my first semester, I took a bookmaking workshop, bookmaking class with Professor Heather Peters, where I learned all the different structures of bookmaking, and I became obsessed. Heather is an amazing artist, papermaker herself, and I eventually became her studio assistant for her studio Society of Hermits. As that sort of evolved, I started taking different concepts I was learning from bookmaking, I'm sorry, into papermaking. So I was using different aspects of the bookmaking into my work and sort of kind of still pushing this idea of what a drawing could be. And using the paper that we were making, I started realizing how personable paper was and how I pull a sheet of paper is different than how you might pull a sheet of paper. Obviously that there's technique involved, but I started developing this relationship with handmade paper. And I started to see how the act of making paper is really humbling in that it can tell you if you're having a good or a bad day, if you're hungry or not hungry, which is really similar to drawing. And I started still questioning this idea of what drawing was for me and the relationship I was having. I started realizing that drawing was an act of manipulating materials. And through that, I was, starting to substitute graphite and kind of moving away from that. And I was exploring copper and patina on handmade paper. I've always been really interested in working with found objects, discarded recyclable materials, as I think it's really important as an artist to think about what it is that we're using as a sustainability aspect. And so in these pieces, these papers are a mixture of cotton and abaca, most of them. And I really loved the nature in which the quality of the handmade paper and how some of the texture in which they were. I also started to think of drawing as a way to manipulate materials, and looking at these, I was thinking about how I could create a drawing just based off of, the basic concepts of light, form, texture, color, presence. And in my thesis work, this idea of connections that were forced, found, and failed really kind of influenced that. And I started using, again, those techniques I had learned in bookmaking to, the folding became the mark making expression, and the investigation and the form and the structure. And I also learned how, for me, paper remembers like the body. So I started working with tissue paper because it really has this translucent quality that sort of mimics skin. It's strong and yet really can withstand sewing it through a sewing machine. And so I was really having fun exploring with that, and just how it really shows everything on it. And actually making my own tissue paper is something that I'm interested in still continuing to pursue. And I also kind of wanted to, in my thesis, redrawn, I was thinking about how I've always had a relationship with paper goods, and how sometimes that paper can take on different forms. And I worked with this muslin because it kind of reminded me of a cardstock, of working with that, but I just kind of wanted to try with it. I also had an example of my investigations within the studio, because I think it's really important to play in the studio and try different things out. So I was trying these paper pulp castings, which I wanted to investigate further, but time went by really fast. So I wanted to pursue that more. I also, just this past July, had an artist in residence at Art Produce here in San Diego. And I had the whole month, and I felt like time was moving so quick after graduating. And I had this idea of casting place. And Art Produce has this lovely garden in the back, and there's lots of fruits and vegetables, and it's amazing. And I had this idea of making paper out in the garden, and it was really hot this summer, and I was able to pull the sheets and lay them out to dry in the garden. So we have some pebbles and the hose, and I was just getting interested in making all these different forms. And I took it upon myself to try and cast all the rocks in the garden. And I really became intrigued by working with the newly formed sheets and just how they sort of draped across this. And this became an installation, which is actually, this is grounded, which is in the members showcase. And this is actually something that I want to still continue investigating, is the pulp, is making pulp castings and drawing the forms and playing with the structure of paper. I'm interested in looking for my own paper beater, maybe a smaller scale one, but if anybody knows, let me know. But thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my Pecha Kucha. If you're interested in seeing more of my work, please visit my website or follow me on Instagram. So thank you.
Wonderful. Those presentations went by so quickly. I'm going to ask everyone to turn their cameras back on, and just really quickly. Just wanted to, before we go into the transition for the Q&A, I'd like to invite folks who are registered for the North American Hand Papermakers Conference to tune into the Curator's Talk with Claudio Forna-Draber on Saturday at 7:15 Eastern Time. This year is the first year of the Guest Curate Triennial Series, and Claudia has curated an exhibition in partnership with Dudonay entitled Paper Postcolonial Narratives, which includes work by Emma Amos, Laura Anderson Barbata, Firelli Baez, Mark Bradford, Lakila Brown, Rico Gatson, Tahir Carl Kamali, Lena Puerta, and Paul Wong. So we're gonna take a look at questions and open the floor up. If you didn't present a question, but have something to share, let's see. So there's some questions and there are some comments in our chat. So this question is for Jill. Are you spot welding the wire, then covering it with paper? Is the wire painted, dripping the wire into the vat, or what?
So
Cool work.
all of that. I do spot weld, and I also then am coating with an enamel, so to inhibit any rusting. And when I find that I have a large trough that I put the pulp in, and then I can dip the larger screen. So what I do is I solder up a large grid, and then I start to dismantle it and cut it up and kind of transform it. So initially I dip that whole flat grid into this trough, and then after I manipulate the form, then I go in with sheets of handmade paper of Abaca, and I individually wrap each of the lines to kind of create a smoother finish. Almost in some ways, it almost turns into like a bone-like finish.
Okay. This question is for Leah. It says, well, there's two, why the house imagery and how are the stencils used?
I'll start with how the stencils are used. For my printmaking, my stencils are used I ink them up and I place them on my paper and I run them through my press. So that's a positive image. For my paper making, I'm putting a stencil on and pouring paper pulp around that. And then when I have the colors that I want on that layer, I layer and layer and layer stencils, whether it's Pellon or whether it's hot glue. And then when I'm ready to pull it off, I pull it off. But it is the negative space has received the new paper pulp colors. And then I just keep on layering, or I may just put pulp in a cup of water and pour it all over the whole thing. So it's very spontaneous, and even with my stencils, like I don't plan it completely out, but I use those same stencils for both my printmaking and my paper making. And the houses. So I started this body of work probably when I started paper making with the Women's March. And I was very involved in going to women's marches and everything that was going on politically and socially. And so my images were about text, very readable text and silhouettes of myself and silhouettes of people that I know. Then the word community started coming into my head, and how does a community deal with all of these issues that are going on in the world? And then houses kind of started creeping into my images, silhouettes inside a house, around a house, whatever. And then eventually community kind of took over, and broader issues and feelings started taking place. My text became not as legible, and and so text, I haven't used silhouettes and figures in my work, but even my houses now are becoming a little more abstract. So that was a long answer to houses are a safe place, and how does a community react to each other in crisis or while things are happening around the world. So.
Okay. This is more a comment or reaction. Sage says, I love the idea that paper reflects your mood and your day. And Jess, did you want to share your comment to that response?
I totally agree with that. I think that's part of what gets written into it, right? And you can see it physically sometimes. Someone else can see it too.
Let's see. Sorry, it's just taking a minute for me to switch between the chat and the Q&A. Amanda, was there overlap between everyone's answers to all of the questions you asked? Why they each make paper about the census, etc.?
Oh, she's muted.
Oh.
There was not as much overlap as I would have expected. With a little bit with the sound of paper, the rattling of the paper, and lots of jokes about tasting paper, but not as much, you know, not as much overlap. And then what we did is we took, because sometimes it's hard to read people's handwriting, we took the excerpts out. So I took the ones out that were in English, and Peng Wu took the ones out, or Lu actually took the ones out that were in Chinese. And so that you can actually, there's some places where you can actually read easier, because a lot of people aren't going to take the time to read the letters, but they'll take the time to read the excerpts. And I was shocked how little overlap there was actually. So that was kind of nice.
This question is for Hanna and Meg. Would you two consider doing an artistic collaboration together?
Well, Meg, you're on mute.
I don't know. Hannah's I don't know how to say this. You're not an artist. You're
Correct.
she's
I'm a businesswoman.
she's
Yes.
a businesswoman. So, but if she invited me to the Philippines to teach Pulp painting, I'd go, you know, but don't tell her I said so, you know. So put a little bug in her ear there. Yeah, why not, right? So, but
Anything is possible.
that's right. Hey, a year ago, we didn't even know each other. Now we're talking all the time, so.
And Hanna, the Abaca, I know that your business is a fairly new business, but had you had prior experience or a connection to Abaca before seeing a need in the market?
Yes, so we started planting in 2018, and last year when the pandemic hit, we saw there was a big increase in the demand for abaca fiber. That's when I started to do procurement and trading. But in the beginning, we only wanted to do farming. So we wanted to help the global market as well with producing the abaca fiber. So that's how we started trading. It's just nice to see how your papers and how you make it, how they look raw as a raw material and how we process it. I'll show you some of the videos on Saturday. You'll see more how we harvest and how we make it into a fiber, and ultimately you make it into paper.
All right. Let's see. So Leah, someone's asking, do the foam stencils hold up well in water? And are you using overbeaten abaca?
She's got a.
You're still on mute.
I'm always on mute. I'm sorry about that. So my pieces are mostly made out of cotton. 2 summers ago, I did a series of paper pulp paintings using Kozo, and they were stunning and delicate, strong, right? Kozo is a strong paper, but they looked delicate. That's where I used those metallic pigments a lot, and they were beautiful. Most of my work is done with cotton, though.
Okay. And Amanda, what was the most memorable response you received to the questionnaire?
That's a hard one. Oh. Well, one of the things that someone said, which really struck me, was the difference between reading on a digital device and reading a book. As on a digital device, you're always like jumping, like you're going from this link to that link to that link. And there's this sort of scattered uncenteredness about it. You know, you're zooming in, you're zooming out, detail. I mean, those are beautiful things that you can do. But with the book, there's sort of a calmness, and you're getting this one person's perspective, and you're really there. And I found that was true. It's just something I remember that one of the artists from China wrote about, and it's sort of changed my habits on the computer. So I remember that comment, but there's a lot of really juicy perspectives in the book, and that was one of them.
So this question is for Sage, and the question is, are you more focused and interested in the process, like the actual action of kind of experimenting with these things and then figuring out the like how to display aesthetically, or do you do the experimentation and from the experimentation then use the techniques that you learned from that to create specific visuals?
That's a good question. I feel like I don't have my own beater, so I normally it depends on me having access to getting pulp and stuff like that. So when I do, I'm able to make my own paper, and experiments out of that usually stem into a piece. A lot of times in my practice, sometimes I have an idea for how I want something. And I'll, seek it out, but mostly, yeah, it is driven by just experimentations and thoughts and processes through play, and just trying different things out, and then just, kind of responding to the form. I would say I'm definitely an intuitive maker in that regard.
And let's see, Amanda, when will the book be available?
Wouldn't you like to know? Wouldn't I like to know? The only thing that's kept me sane during having to learn in design, which I had no idea how to use, is the fact that there is not a deadline on it. But I do work on it 6 to 8 hours a day, including weekends. So I'm working very, very hard on it. It was started 4 years ago. And there was many moments where the 3 collaborators, like, Lou had to have 2 museum shows, I mean, he's just a little bit busy. And I had to hand over cave paper to the next generation. And Peng had to get a full-time teaching job somewhere. We've all had these other things that have gotten in the way, but right now I'm really full on working on it. So I'm hoping my goal is to have it by the upcoming Codex, which is in April of next year, but I'm sure I'll have something before then.
So one last comment, and this is just coming from me. I really loved seeing Jill, your work and Sage's. Seems like they're in conversation with one another. Seeing the grids that are appearing, that you're using, and the grids that are appearing from your folds. I just wanted to mention that. It's really nice to see those presented, in the same event. There's one more question. This is for Sage. It says, you seem to enjoy 3-dimensional paper more than making flat paper pieces. Hearing you talk about the way paper relates to the body makes me feel like you relate to the 3D works more.
I really appreciate that comment. Yeah, I'm not afraid to call myself a sculptor, but I think my drawings have definitely evolved to become more 3-dimensional. I still kind of approach paper as a drawer, but I do love the different forms. And I think, that's kind of what I've been exploring and investigating. I kind of have up on my wall, like a paper pulp that I did casting. So I am really enjoying kind of like using the pulp to make more of these kind of objects. So it's sort of like an evolving process.
I could listen to you guys talk all night, but it is almost 9:30. So we're going to do a quick wrap up. Beth put in the chat that registration, let's see, where is it? Or if you want to just come on and say it, let's see. Oh, tonight is the last night to register for the conference. So if you can attend on the day of the videos will be available only to those that have registered. So if Saturday and Sunday you can't make it to the actual event, it's still good to register because you'll get access to all of the wonderful talks and resources.
Yes. One final thing. This talk tonight is also going to be available. It will be available for free on the YouTube channel along with the tour talks, which are accessed through the North American Hand Papermaking website, which is also through that same link. Then you can get to the whole website through that. We're this weekend going to do a vendors fair that will also be open through the rest of the year on there. It'll just be an online page that everyone can go to, as well as kind of a highlight during the conference. So even if you can't attend, then when that is live on the weekend and afterwards, then feel free to go on and check out all the cool things that people do. Some of our people that are here tonight are going to be participating in the vendors fair. So yeah, thank you so much, Jerusha, for putting this all together. Thank you to all of the artists as well for all of the talks. I'm so inspired. But yeah, so thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
We appreciate you all.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thanks for organizing
Thank
this.
you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was nice variety.
Mhm.
Everyone have a good night.
Yeah,
You
good
too.
night.
Okay.
Yeah, with that will sign off. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.